Hello and welcome to People and Profit. I'm Kate Moody. In today's show, we're taking a closer look at European industry and whether and how it can regain its competitive edge. A new report highlights a growing gap in both productivity and innovation between European companies and American and Chinese ones. Advanced technologies in particular have fallen behind the curve. Mario Draghi, the former head of the European Central Bank and one-time Italian Prime Minister, in September outlined a proposal for some 800 billion euros in additional investment every year, a mix of public and private funding, more than half of which would go towards Europe's energy transition, with the rest earmarked for digital technologies, defense and security capabilities, and boosting productivity through innovation. Without drastic change, he said that European industry could find itself facing an existential challenge, a slow agony of decline.
I would say until 2 years ago, we would never have such a conversation as the one we're having today, because things were sort of going well. We were doing well out of globalization. Unemployment was steadily falling. But now we cannot ignore it any longer. Now conditions have changed.
Well, we're joined now by Tim Figures from the Boston Consulting Group. Thanks for being on the show today. Do you think that Mario Draghi's plan responds to the real challenges that European industries are facing today?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a great summary of the challenge coming at a critical point in the European Union's development. You heard about the economic challenges that the European Union's facing, but as a new European Commission mandate starts in a month or two's time, it's really important that that new European Commission grapples these challenges.
So good timing from that point of view. From a broader point of view, is it potentially too late to catch up with the US and China in certain industries anyway?
No, I don't think it is. And the report makes clear what needs to be done in order to address those challenges. It's true, as Mr. Draghi sets out, that Europe faces the loss of three main forces that have laid behind our competitiveness over the last decades. That's a relatively open global trading system, access to competitively priced energy, and a relatively benign security environment. But he also sets out, through large amounts of public and private investment, how we can turn those challenges into opportunities for growth and improved productivity in the European economy.
One of the challenges that the EU often runs into when they're trying to rejig their strategies like this is the need for consensus among the 27 member states. Do these proposals on industry really stand a chance of being enacted?
I think significant parts of them do stand a chance of being enacted. And as we've seen, President Ursula von der Leyen has made clear that these should be a key part of the instructions that her new Commission team should follow as they take up their mandates in a couple of months' time. However, there are certainly challenges, and as Mr. Draghi makes clear, there are areas where European decision-making is still relatively risk-averse, and also in a fast-moving and fast-changing global environment, often a bit slow to respond to significant changes.
What about the question of money in all this? We've seen this proposal that would see many of these changes financed with common debt. Is that feasible? Is it affordable?
So that's something, I guess, that politicians in the European Union member states will have to decide, and people have been putting forward their views both for and against that proposal. I guess from Mr. Draghi's point of view, he pointed to the way in which European-level debt was agreed to in order to help the EU respond to the COVID crisis. In his view, I think, the competitiveness and growth challenge is another crisis that he hopes will lead to an appropriate response from European policymakers.
Which sectors would you say are struggling the most, and which could really stand to benefit from some bloc-sponsored investment here?
Well, I think there are a number of areas that he identifies. Firstly, I think we probably shouldn't just focus on struggling sectors, if we want to characterize them that, or middle technologies, as he calls them. I think it's also worth looking at sectors that can be vectors for growth. And if you look at the examples of both the US and China, sectors like tech and digital, and also the green economy can be significant growth vectors. And those are areas I think we should look at. However, it's clear that energy prices in particular exacerbated by the consequences of the war in Ukraine and the impact on global energy supplies, are significantly higher in Europe than elsewhere. And that is really impacting energy-intensive industries. And it's good to see a whole chapter focused on those sectors like steel or chemicals and what can be done to help.
And when we look at the high-tech industry in particular, we know that there are relatively few European unicorns or really highly valued startups. Is that something that could potentially change if we see some of these proposals enacted?
Yes, it is something that could change, and that's something the report really focuses on. What we currently have is a really good innovation record, but as those types of unicorns scale up, they tend to go at the moment to California in order to have access to the US market and also to the venture capital finance that they need to grow. That's why reforming the way capital markets work in the European Union is such a key plank of Mr. Draghi's proposals, precisely so those types of innovators can get the funds they need to scale up in Europe without leaving the continent.
I want to turn next to the issue of tariffs. And Tim, I'm going to ask you to just stay with us for a moment because trade tensions between the EU and China are rising as they announced a new round of tit-for-tat tariffs on electric vehicles and cognac imports. Andrew Hillier has the details.
After the EU targeted China's electric vehicle industry, now Beijing has Europe's brandy in its crosshairs. China's Commerce Ministry has announced a raft of provisional tariffs on the bloc's brandy imports, ranging from 30% to just under 40%. French cognac stands to take the biggest hit, accounting for up to 95% of European brandy exports to China. Cognac makers have accused the French government of abandoning them.
We're of course quite worried because today China is our second biggest market. If we at the cognac sector lose that market, the consequences will be disastrous for the retailers who commercialise them and, through a domino effect, for the rest of the wine-growing sector.
It appears to be a U-turn from Beijing. Back in summer, China had promised not to impose tariffs, despite opening a series of probes into anti-dumping practices on EU brandy, pork and dairy products. But that was before the EU slapped fresh duties on Chinese-made electric vehicles. At the start of October, Brussels approved tariffs of up to 35% on imports, following an investigation into Chinese state subsidies. Earlier in the year, the US and Canada introduced even higher tariffs at 100%. They've all accused China of unfairly subsidizing its electric vehicle industry to give it a competitive edge over foreign car makers.
Tim Figures from BCG, thanks for staying with us. What's your take on these kinds of tariffs?
Well, I think your report shows some of the unintended consequences when countries or blocs go down this kind of route, with retaliation happening across a whole range of sectors way beyond automotive. These types of trade defence measures that the European Union has imposed are really only ever intended to be relatively temporary. And while they will provide some breathing space for European automotive manufacturers as they develop their own electric vehicle models, I don't think they would be a realistic long-term solution to the kind of competitiveness challenges that we've been discussing.
So in general, you don't think that sanctioning foreign-made goods will really strengthen innovation within a domestic business, looking, for example, specifically at this question of electric vehicles, for example?
But I think, as I said, I think it provides a short-term breathing space for European industry to innovate and to respond to the kind of challenges set out in Mario Draghi's report. And I'm sure the European automotive industry will rise to that challenge. But I think on their own, they're not a mechanism that will deliver the kind of changes that we need to see to maintain European competitiveness. They need to be seen alongside a whole raft of other measures, as Mr. Draghi sets out in his report.
There's been a lot of focus on China with this report in particular, but we know that the EU has also been trying to catch up with the US Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which offered significant subsidies for, in particular, green industry projects in the United States. How is the EU addressing those transatlantic trade tensions at the moment?
Well, clearly there's a major political event coming up in the United States in just under a month's time. And until we know the result of that election, it's a bit difficult to know quite how things will unfold. But clearly there have been significant conversations going on between the European Commission and the current United States administration. And it's interesting to see the EU and key member states like Germany and France looking much more at the need to provide the kind of incentives for decarbonisation that the Inflation Reduction Act does, not just penalties or regulation.
The EU has, as you say, made decarbonisation a real pillar of its policy across all kinds of areas here. Can that decarbonisation really be achieved while also boosting competitiveness?
Yes, I think it can. And also importantly, as Mr. Draghi sets out, in also improving economic and energy security. Because as we saw in the aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the spike in energy prices that followed, European industry significantly reduced its demand for hydrocarbons. And if we can carry on to decarbonise, then we can not only take advantage of new vectors of growth like wind energy or green hydrogen production, for example, but also reduce our dependence and improve our energy security.
Tim Figures from the Boston Consulting Group, thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you.
That's all for now. Don't forget to look for People and Profit on the podcast platform of your choice, or as always, on the France 24 website. Until next time, thanks for watching.